Don't you know, can't you hear, won't you see? Gene here, alive and in living color right here on the YouTube. Presenting to you, Gene Has Concerns. Dark Side of the Ring, Jeff Jarrett and TNA Part 3. Now, first let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Gene Beard. Years of professional wrestling experience from back learning from Malenko in '84, being a referee, a manager. I've been a booker. I've been a matchmaker in front of the crowd, a kayfabe matchmaker. I've been all sorts of things in wrestling, setting up, tearing down rings, etc., 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 off and on for 40 years now, 40 plus years. So I do have a thing or two to say. I do have some concerns, especially about this show. Now, this is part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2 yet of what I'm talking about, go to genehasconcerns.com and catch up on those episodes. And I hope the 3rd episode is better than his last 2, because this is a learning process for me, because this is a brand new venture. So anyway, listen, let's talk about my first concern. Dixie Carter. I'm sorry. If I had been in that room up in those stands when Dixie Carter came out and gave the speech the way she gave it, I probably would have walked out. That was rude of her. It was disrespectful. It was coming from someone that's not been involved in the wrestling business, doesn't have a clue how things work in the wrestling business, except what's being fed to her in this year, what's being fed to her in that year. And I'm sorry. I probably would have walked out. I probably would have quit. They would have had to possibly, I don't know. I might have been in breach of contract, because going one-on-one to someone and talking to them, and even bad talking to them. I mean, I've had to talk to some guys sometimes that, may not have been the nicest way possible, but to get my point across of what we were doing and what I wanted, then yeah, that happens. But to do it in front of everybody, and she wasn't calling any individual out, but still, that's just a big concern of mine. I wouldn't have done it. It hurts the morale of the company. The boys and girls ain't going to give a shit anymore. And you're not going to get that backing anymore. You're not seen as a leader. You're seen as a dictator. And that's exactly what she was coming across as. So, and she brought in Hogan and Bischoff. And, we think that, or one would think maybe they would do something really grand and really make things better and drive ratings and stuff like that. But I don't know. Jeff kind of thought that Hogan be a brand ambassador more, and that wasn't the case. And could they improve TNA from what it was? I think so. Did they, though? Not really. So one of the first major changes they made was removing the 6-sided ring, going back to 4 sides, removing the identity of total nonstop action. And I think even though those rings could be painful, could hurt, I think that's really did hurt the company with its core fan base. And I can see why. I can understand why they wanted to go traditional wrestling, but I can't understand why, in a sense, because this is the brand. This is it. It's like there's always been some sort of a Titantron in WWE ever since they brought it out. And there's always something there to see. Be like taking that away and never having that again, never having the big entrance again. You just walk out through a curtain. You just took away part of the identity of what WWE would be. Well, this was the same thing. So, and it's not that 4-sided rings are bad, but again, it was, I don't know. Anyway, was it a smart decision? If you think it was a smart decision, leave it in the comments. And let me know what you think about that. So now let's get to the Monday Night Wars Part 2. And back when Eric Bischoff launch of Monday Night Wars back in WCW, he had almost a blank check. Nowadays, or at this time, he didn't have that. They didn't have all the money to spend to go against Monday Night Raw. So it was a third-rate show going up against the monster. And that just wasn't going to cut it. Ratings. January 4th special. Raw was about 5.6 million. Impact was 2.2 million. Decent in today's standards, where you're lucky to break a million, AEW is doing. But back then, that wasn't so good. And March 8th, Raw was 5.1 and Impact was 1.4. And by late April, Impact had fallen to roughly 700,000 viewers. So it wasn't cutting it. I understand that Hogan and Bischoff was kind of a curiosity, but they didn't take TNA in the right direction. And going head to head with WWE just wasn't a good look for them, really. And this wasn't Monday Night Wars Part 2. TNA put itself beside WWE and showed everybody how far apart the two companies really were. So now let's get to another concern that back then I did have a concern that Jeff Jarrett stole Karen Angle from Kurt Angle. That was the rumor going all over the place. That was in the locker rooms, even the independent locker rooms. Well, now we learned that wasn't quite the case, as we saw last episode. But TNA was able to turn the real life rumors into a storyline. And I actually liked the storyline. This is when I was watching again for a little bit. And like many fans, I kind of thought that Jeff had stole Karen. And if they were able to work it into a storyline, great. Kind of like going back to the Edge, Lita, and Matt Hardy angle they did, where Lita used to date Matt Hardy, then she dated Edge. And they worked that into an angle. And hey, make some money. There's been lots of wrestlers in this business who have made money despising each other, hating each other. They get in the ring, they work a match, they pick up their paycheck, they go home. That's it. They don't deal with each other, they don't associate with each other. But if I'm able to make a payday with you, I'm willing to work with you in the ring. And that's what Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett did along with Karen. So I got to give them credit for that because they were able to pull it off. They did a great job. And, it was great at the time. The angle worked so well that some fans believed the storyline. Again, me being an outsider in their business, but not an outsider in the business, I believed it too. But I didn't believe it at the time the storyline was happening. I believed it happened previously. So, and it shows both the power and danger of using real life pain and rumors in wrestling, because that can be dangerous. That can cause a hardship on one or more of the parties involved. Now, Jeff Hardy and Richard Road, another concern of mine. At the time, and I didn't watch this pay-per-view, but I saw clips and read about it afterwards. And somebody should have pulled the plug a lot sooner than waiting until Jeff got in the ring. And Eric Bischoff being smart enough to go out there and saying, and first trying to tell Jeff to leave the ring, and then telling Sting just win it. Just do your deal, And on a personal note, years ago, a little bar / rock and roll place called Masquerades in Ybor City, I actually wrestled a couple times there. And one time I had a few Pabst Blue Ribbons because they were free before the match. I wrestled this girl who was still training, but we had this big schmoz going on that she was a tattoo artist in Ybor, so she had a huge following. We had a huge crowd for people to see me whip her ass, and instead she whipped my ass. But I may have caught her with a couple of forearms that, even though I was hitting my own hand, may have been stiffer than they should have been. And I didn't do that anymore. I saved all my drinking for after the matches, or after my match at least, after whatever I was doing, whether I was just working ringside or in the ring. And now I don't drink anymore at all, but that kind of taught me a lesson. And I hope Jeff, he seems to have learned that lesson. Now he's had another few slip ups, but it wasn't in ring slip ups from what I can see. So, but don't drink and get in the ring. Bottom line, don't do drugs and get in the ring. Bottom line. So, wrestling is built on trust. I'm giving you my body. She gave me her body in a sense in a wrestling ring, and I didn't honor her. And I had those few beers ahead of time. So, a little bit tipsy maybe, but not the way I should have performed. So, and I'm ashamed of myself for that. So, but now, that was a small building. What Jeff did was on pay-per-view. That hurts the business. That hurts the company. So, and the company survived the embarrassment and they're able to move on, but still. And then we get to another concern of mine that was very embarrassing. I thought, I didn't see it live again. I saw the clips afterwards of Dixie Carter pleading for Hulk Hogan to stay. Hogan was leaving. His contract was up. He wasn't going to stick around anymore. I don't understand why. If people know the reason why he decided to move on, I don't think the show said, but leave a comment letting me know, why, if he ever admitted why he left. But I remember the clip, and as you see here, she's holding on to his leg as he's been drug out. Now, if this was an angle where he was going to stay, and then this was kind of comical, but not when he's leaving, and there's no payoff for it. He could have, if he was going to stay and they did something like this, then great. And then she, as the big boss, can start shitting on him and, doing things towards him because he was going to disrespect her. Then, yeah, that's an angle. That's a continued storyline. And then there's a payoff at the end. But for this, no. I didn't care for it. It was embarrassing for her. I was embarrassed for her and her company. But you paid him, you gave him power, and then let his exit make the person running the company look like a fool. And that's exactly what she did. So, and Hogan leaves. Financial problems continue, and Jeff Jarrett tries one more time to regain control of the company. And in comes Toby Keith. And that's a chance to possibly help the company out. And Jeff turned to him. They're friends. Toby's willing to get involved, but only if Jeff is the one running the company. And that wasn't going to happen. The company, nope, we're not doing that. And then he resigns from TNA. And this is probably Jeff's last real chance to regain control and power of the company. And even with the money and the star power potentially behind him, the people in charge did not trust him to lead it. That's the bottom line. So TNA wanted help, but didn't want Jeff back in control. Jeff leaves TNA. He starts Global Force Wrestling. And then Anthem is involved. And Global Force, Anthem, and the comeback that wasn't. And after leaving TNA, Anthem takes control of TNA. On paper, it looks like Jeff was finally getting close to the company. He built again. And reality situations are unstable, and Jeff was already struggling personally. He was already going through his own personal struggles by this point. Had been for years, it sounds like, but this was really bad. And Jeff finally got back near the thing he built, but then he was in such a bad place, and it wasn't really a comeback at all. He returned angry, returned hurt, drinking more heavily, and no, just didn't work. From here, the story stops being mainly about TNA's problems. It becomes more about Jeff's problems and Karen's problems with their relationship. And they didn't get too much in the kids' involvement, which is kind of good, I guess, for privacy, but still, you can kind of picture what the kids might have been going through too in that. But addiction treatment and recovery. His drinking gets progressively worse. He's at the AAA or Triple Mania show with AAA, and that was a total mess. I think that was Vampiro. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. That was Vampiro back there with him backstage at that event. He does get some outpatient treatment, relapses immediately, he says, and then Karen even has to call 911, and Jeff finally accepts that he needs serious help, and he enters treatment. So I applaud him for that. And Jeff spent years struggling with grief, and the grief of losing his first wife, the grief of losing his in-ring brother, Owen Hart, the grief of losing his company, and even though he has kids and had Karen, there's a lot to try to overcome. And wrestling has a long history of people working through pain. And Jeff's story shows how dangerous that mindset can become when addiction's involved. But recovery gives Jeff another chance. Next chapter takes him to the WWE Hall of Fame. He gets that phone call, and he's shocked. And Jeff rebuilds his life. He later returns to WWE as the senior vice president of live events. And that run ends with the WWE change of leadership. And from what I understand, one of the things that Jeff has said in an interview was that Road Dogg is Triple H's boy, and he kind of got the gig after Jeff because Jeff wasn't one of Triple H's guys. So now he's with AEW, and now they had the Owen Hart tournament that he's been involved in. And, documentary moved kind of quickly. I was kind of shocked that it got done as quickly as it did, even though it was the same hour. But it just kind of, went by really fast, I thought, on this one. And Jeff's brief WWE executive chapter deserved at least a mention here, but he didn't get that. And Jeff survived it all. Karen has survived it. I think Karen did an excellent job here on this show with her interviews and stuff. And, his story isn't just about losing control of TNA. It's rebuilding his life and where he's at today. And do you think Jeff Jarrett will ever return to TNA in a meaningful way someday? I kind of hope so. When his AEW run is done, I'd love for him to come back to TNA. And even if it's an on-air role as a commissioner or on-air authority or something like that, I think it just kind of bookends his story and the TNA story. But, Jeff and TNA have both survived more than enough reasons to disappear in the first place, and somehow they're both still here. I don't watch TNA right now. I don't watch AEW either, but, I kind of miss the old traditional wrestling like a Jim Cornette and all of us other ones, but still, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I'm glad there's another place for the boys and girls to work. Besides WWE and AEW on a mainstream platform, they also have TNA and MLW if you look at that. So I'm glad that those options are out there for the other boys and girls to find some work. So anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. I kept it short and sweet this time. I'm below 20 minutes, it looks like, by my clock. But always remember, Gene has concerns.